Geek Out! Hey, this is a special episode where we talk to Brian Volk-Weiss, the creator and showrunner of The Toys That Made Us on Netflix. We talk about that documentary series. We also kind of tease when the show is coming back for the second half of this first run. We just talk about the cool behind the scenes process putting this and how it's a labor of love for Brian. So check it out and check out the show. It's fantastic. And joining us, we have the creator of the Netflix show The Toys That Made Us, Brian Volk-Weiss. Brian, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me on. Very excited to be here.
So let's go ahead and start with let's start from the beginning. You're a lifelong toy collector, toy aficionado, but how did this show and getting Netflix and everybody to pick it up, how did it all kind of come about?
So, I'm a TV producer, so as a TV producer, you try to find things that interest you or excite you, and I'm a huge history buff. I love history in addition to toys, and at some point, probably about 7 or 8 years ago, I noticed that there were, just to give you one example, there were lots and lots of books about the War of 1812, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful to the War of 1812, but I don't think people are as interested in the War of 1812 as they are, what is the origin of Optimus Prime? What is the origin of Hello Kitty? What is the origin of Snake Eyes? And I just thought it was crazy. And I'll be honest with you, now that I've even already done the first season, I still think it's crazy that, to the best of my knowledge, there has never been a documentary made about Transformers. So anyway, I took my love of history, my love of toys, I combined them. Long before I went to Netflix, I spent 5 or 6 years trying to sell it, and nobody wanted it. And I do a lot of stand-up comedy production for Netflix, so I know a lot of the people there. And I just kept bugging them about what they started calling Brian's Toy Show, and finally, they I guess started to take me seriously. And long story short, they told me, "Hey, a show about toys could work for us if you do it like this." So I took that information. I then went out and shot about a 5-minute tape. I presented them the tape. I made a treatment, literally a 35-page treatment, and that's what got them to agree to greenlight the show.
You've got some pretty unprecedented access. I mean, you were mentioning that this history had never really been seen before, but I mean, you're talking to the lawyer at Kenner Toys who's got those original contracts with Lucasfilm. You're talking to the creators. I never knew that there was this much convoluted history, but between who gets the credit for creating He-Man and Skeletor, or who came up with the name. I mean, even now they're not sure who came up with Cobra over in the G.I. Joe. Was it really kind of easy? I mean, it makes it, again, you've got such a wide breadth of interviews in every single episode. How much work and how was the process of setting that all up?
There were two things that we did. One of which was, within 24 hours of having the paperwork done with Netflix, I asked them to give me a letter that said, "To whom it may concern, this letter shall serve as confirmation that the Nacelle Company, which is my company, is making a TV show about toys for Netflix. And should you need any more proof, please call my phone number." And then it had the name of a lawyer. So I got that letter, and then I started forwarding that letter to Hasbro and Mattel and Lego and Sanrio. And once they got that letter, then they started taking us seriously. And then because everybody claims that they have a deal with Netflix or HBO or whatever. So once we had Mattel and Hasbro and Lego and everybody else on board, then a lot of the people that would not have talked to us basically called Hasbro or Mattel. They said it was cool, and they talked to us. So that was half of the story. And then the other half of the story was I'm friends with, for years, a lot of experts in the toy community. And as soon as the show was greenlit, I told them, and they made introductions to all the people that we needed to know. For example, in the Star Wars episode, we worked with a guy named Brian Stillman who made a great documentary called Plastic Galaxy about Star Wars toys. And, he gave us a list of everybody he knew. Then he gave us a list of everybody he didn't know and didn't get for his film. And then while talking to both of those groups of people, we found about all these other people. So that was all that. But I'm glad you brought up Jim Kipling, the Kenner lawyer, because that was like my one thing because of my career and what I've seen in my own career. I have always known the lawyers are the people to talk to because they're like the only people at a company that see everything. So one of the things that I said to the researchers from day one, find the lawyers, find the lawyers, find the lawyers. And we found a lot of the lawyers, but Kipling, A, he was one of the only lawyers who agreed to go on camera, and B, he dropped the bombshell on us. My entire life, I thought George Lucas was getting the majority of the toy revenue, and we were absolutely shocked to learn that that was not the case.
Yeah, you guys have this, like, the distribution there, because historically, as kids, that was the myth growing up. It's like, 20th Century Fox gave George Lucas the majority of the merchandising rights because they thought Star Wars would flop. And I always kind of took that for granted. And then, you watch the documentary and you're like, there's other players that are actually bigger than George in this entire story. Yeah. Yeah, it was... literally my jaw dropped when he said that, and I didn't even believe him. And as I'm sure you noticed, he literally bought the contract with him. Oh yeah. So it was one of the favorite moments of my entire career was that interview. With the second set of episodes, you've got Transformers, Lego. One of the big things, Star Trek. I'm kind of if I had to make the association, I was always more of a Star Trek kid, at least growing up, than a Star Wars kid. But I don't remember there being a whole hell of a lot of Star Trek toys, and I was kind of curious. I'm a little later in the '80s, but at that point, like Final Frontier's out, so I don't remember a lot of Final Frontier merchandising. But yeah, I was kind of wondering if you could kind of tease some of the stuff that we'll see in the Star Trek episode. Well, it's funny you bring that up because I've been getting, in a very humorous, respectful way, not in a bad way, I've been getting a lot of grief on the internet because people are like, why would you do Star Trek? Like, why didn't you do Turtles? Why didn't you do My Little Pony or wrestling or Power Rangers? And I'll tell you, there's two reasons we did Star Trek. Number one is I'm a Trekkie, and I didn't know if I would be able to get any more episodes greenlit after this 8. And I was like, you know what? It's my show. Netflix trusts me. I'm going to do Star Trek. So I'm very honest about that I did that one for me. But then the other reason, and I would not have done it if this other reason wasn't also a variable. But all the other 7 episodes that we did, the legal rights and controls to those toys was consistent and dominant. So the best example, of course, is George Lucas. He had the legal and financial power to decide what toys got made, what toys didn't get made, and he was able to exert a tremendous amount of quality control. He could see a shampoo manufacturer bring in an Ewok shampoo, and he could say, oh, no, that Ewok's too tall.
try again. And that was true for every toy we did. Lego, the quality control at Lego, nobody's better. Star Trek, on the other hand, conservatively had 22 separate licensors over the last 51 years.
Damn.
And again, to put that in perspective, Barbie is, older than Star Trek, and Barbie's had one owner. G.I. Joe is older than Star Trek. It's had one owner. So it was this kind of, there's George Lucas saying, oh, your Ewok shampoo is too tall. And then in Star Trek, you'd have a licensor bringing in like a puzzle that showed the Enterprise landing on a planet, and Paramount would be like, okay. And it was just this like really funny story where, as you may or may not know, like they always got wrong what movies to make toys for. Star Trek 1 was not very popular. They made tons of toys. Star Trek 2, widely considered the best Star Trek movie ever, no toys. Star Trek 3 didn't do that well, tons of toys. Star Trek 4, up until J.J. Abrams, the most successful Star Trek movie, no toys. Star Trek 5, the biggest bomb ever, lots of toys. So it was just this really funny story that stood in deep contrast to all the other toys. And that's why we made that episode.
I have to go down that eBay deep dive then to get me some Final Frontier stuff.
Right?
Yeah.
Just a god asking for a spaceship toy.
Don't do it. You'll be broke.
Fair enough. One of the things, since you invoked yourself as a Trekkie, I do have to ask: are you Team Kirk or are you Team Picard?
I gotta tell you, man, I am a guy, I don't like wishy-washy answers, but, I gotta give you a wishy-washy answer. I like them both. There are many aspects of my life that are Kirk. I would not be where I'm at without Kirk. The thing I want written on my tombstone is a Captain Kirk quote, but at the same time, as a almost 42-year-old executive, I have learned a tremendous amount from Picard. And I really think my life and career would not have been possible without both of them as role models.
It's my two dads, man. Yeah. So,
That's great. That's funny.
What is it about toys? Because I feel like, as you know, again, we're from me and the other co-hosts on here are kind of late '80s kids. We're the last generation before video games really and cable TV kind of take us over. What is it about toys that has endured for decades, and what is that personal connection that these action figures and toys have for you?
So here's my theory, and I got two kids. I got a 4-year-old and a 3-year-old. So I say this to you. I've now spent over a year producing a TV show about toys. I am a kid I'm someone who used to be a kid with my own toys, and now I got kids who play with toys. And here's my answer. And who knows if I'm right or I'm wrong, but here's my answer. It's not really about the toys. It's about who the person was when they played with the toys and their point of view on the world. And what I mean by that is, when you're 7 or 8 years old, you're old enough to have an imagination and have fun, and basically you're the beginnings of the person that you'll become. But you don't know, me and you, we didn't understand, we loved Cobra, but we didn't understand that was the Soviet Union. We didn't understand that the Soviet Union had nuclear missiles that could kill us all with fire. For later generations, for 7-year-olds in the late 90s, they didn't know what HIV was. So when you're 7 or 8 years old, it's a period of innocence in your life. So later on, when you're holding the things, like for me, the little die-cast Millennium Falcon, you know, it reminds me of who I was before I knew about the dark, terrible things in life. So a lot of people are like, the toys suck now, or video games this, video games that. But I just don't think that's the case. I just think it's about who we are and what we were holding at that age. You know, I think, yeah. So that's my answer as it relates to what the toys thing is. But as it relates to me personally, I mean, it's the Millennium Falcon. It's the G.I. Joe Whale. It's the Cobra Hydrofoil. It's Optimus Prime. It's, you know, Starscream, who I've always loved. So that's what that is for me. Those are my toys that I grew up with and I cherish.
And so that's why you called the show The Toys That Made Us. It's kind of like the toys bring out that inner child that, like you were saying, it informs unconsciously the adults we will become.
Yeah, I mean, I cannot tell you how many people told us that Optimus Prime was a father figure to them, or that Barbie was a role model, that, you know, like she could be an astronaut too. Like, that's how you get made, is the stuff that influences you at that age.
What would you say? You had kind of alluded to, you know, Starscream and the Cobra Hydrofoil and the die-cast Millennium Falcon. What is your one, if you had to narrow it down, what is that one toy that you have to have on your desk, or the one that brings you right back? What is your single, the one that you would never let a kid on the schoolyard, in the playground borrow because that one was yours? What is that one toy for you, Brian?
I want to make sure I understand the question. Are you asking me when I was a kid, what was that toy, or for me now, what is that toy?
Is it the same, or did it change over time, or is your favorite toy from you being a kid?
Well, I mean, yeah. The most important toy for me when I was a kid, which I don't have anymore, was the full-size Millennium Falcon. That I mean, hands down, was the most important thing to me in the whole world. I used to bite my fingernails, and my mom told me if I didn't bite my fingernails for a year, she would get it for me. So that is my number one favorite toy from my childhood, without a doubt. But I don't have it anymore.
What is the big the prize from that you currently have, if you have any, you know, from childhood?
The oldest pieces of my collection are the die-cast Millennium Falcon. I have a couple of the Lego figures that I played with as a kid. And I actually have one of my Ninja Turtles, but that was later on. And I have my die-cast Star Destroyer with a little white Rebel blockade runner that comes out of the bottom. Nice. But I had an interesting thing happen in December. I live in L.A., and we had to evacuate our house because of the fires. And I only had about 24 to 28 minutes to evacuate my whole family. And very interesting what I took. I took two things that were of monetary value. I have an MOC Death Star droid, and I have an MOC mail-away Emperor. So I took those because of the money. But then I took my Millennium Falcon, my little die-cast Millennium Falcon, which is probably not worth $10, because it's all scratched up and stuff. And it's so weird what you do when you're rushing or panic. I have this beautiful statue of Ahsoka Tano that I don't even know what it's worth. It's probably worth less than $50. I got it, close to 10 years ago. I grabbed that too. And it was just funny. I didn't really think about what I grabbed. I just grabbed it. And by the way, I had one thing in my collection worth exponentially more than everything I took, like a lot more. And I completely forgot to take that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I kind of had a live fire exercise answering your question.
That's fine. Live fire, no pun intended. What
Right.
when
I
it
didn't do that on purpose.
when it came to picking these 8, you had mentioned that you picked Star Trek because you're a Trekkie, and I mean Star Wars kind of speaks to itself, and so does. Now, was it this 8? Was it always kind of like these are like the Hall of Fame? These are like the Mount Rushmores. If we only get 8, these are the 8 we're gonna do, or was some of them just kind of made more available as you were putting the show together?
Netflix told me I could do 8 episodes and then let me pick the 8. And the criteria that I used was the following. I wanted the toys to be in constant production from their inception. So it said a lot to me about the health of the toy and its ability to penetrate like culture. That from the day they started until today, they've been making them perpetually. You could argue that's not true about He-Man, but it sort of is. But that was the first thing. The second thing was, and this was just my gut. Like, this wasn't some rules, from a book. The second thing was, I pictured the Mount Rushmore of toys, if there was one, and did every toy line have a character that if it was on the Mount Rushmore of toys, everybody would know who it was. So G.I. Joe had Snake Eyes or Cobra Commander or Destro. Star Wars had, R2-D2, yada, yada, yada. So if there was a toy that people would look at it and be like, what is that? Then that was a problem. Number 3, and pretty much most importantly, there had to be a good story. There was one toy line we almost did, but the story was boring. Like, a guy thought of the idea, they put the toy out, it was a huge hit, that was it. So it had to have a good story. And then the fourth one is I wanted the toys to have a rabid fan base. So I wanted there to be conventions for the toy. I wanted people to dress up like the toy. And those were the 4 criteria I used to pick the 8.
Yeah. I guess you don't see too many Beanie Baby cosplay, now that I think about it. No,
you do not.
Now, Brian, to take us out, something we ask everybody that comes on the show. What are you currently geeking out over? It doesn't have to be toys. It can be just anything.
Again, knee-jerk reaction. I'm going bananas about the Eagle Moss Star Trek models.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I literally consider myself so grateful to live in a world where those are being made. I am obsessed with The Expanse. I do not understand why that show is not more popular. I think that is one of the greatest shows of all time. Are you familiar with it?
Yeah, on Sci-Fi, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I just started getting into it this over the holidays, and I'm almost done with the second season. I'd say it's almost as good, and in some ways it's even better than the reimagined Galactica, which I also thought was great. So that's that. What else have I become obsessed with lately? You know what I've become obsessed with? I've always been obsessed with the toys of Robotech, but I've never seen the cartoon. I just loved the design. I just thought the designs were gorgeous. So I've been collecting Robotech forever, but all of Robotech is on Netflix now, and I'm obsessed with the cartoon. It's genius. And also, that reminds me, the other thing I'm obsessed with, which is also on Netflix, is Voltron, which is fantastic.
Fantastic. I don't know what their release schedule is because I feel like we get like 2 seasons a year now, and it's like, I remember watching the original like 70s, 80s Voltron, and I was like, oh, that's cool. And then I remember seeing this, and kind of more out of nostalgia, I turned it on, and it's like the best fucking thing in the world.
Mind-boggling. It gets better and better and better. So, yeah, that's a good list, right?
I think so.
That's healthy.
Yeah.
I think it's cool that you mentioned the Eagle Moss Star Trek toys. I'm actually in the middle of doing the Eagle Moss DeLorean from Back to the Future build, and it is so fun. I don't know if you know much about the other stuff that Eagle Moss is putting out, but they're doing this monthly subscription build where they give you a handful of parts every month, and I'm building this 1/8 scale DeLorean from Back to the Future.
I did not know that. Holy shit!
Does it, Chris? Does it
wow.
have? Does it
no,
have the?
I did not know that.
Yeah. It even.
I bought my first Eagle Moss anything that wasn't Star Trek a couple weeks ago. The Alien, the Lander.
Yeah.
So everything else I've ever bought from Eagle Moss was Star Trek. But I gotta check that out. I did not know they were doing that.
I will have.
I don't know how that company makes money.
Right. I'll have Sam send you the link to their to the build for the DeLorean in the email that we send you after we're done recording here.
Chris, I gotta know. Does it have the?
Please do.
Yeah.
Does it have the Mr. Fusion, or is it like OG DeLorean?
So that's actually a pretty cool thing. It's I want to say they gave us that in issue like 4. They gave us both the plutonium reactor head and the Mr. Fusion, so you can choose which one you want to do.
Wow.
Yeah. They said
wow.
it's going to be about 130.
Wow.
They said it's going to be about 130 issues. It's the issues are quote unquote weekly, but they send it to you on the monthly basis, so you get 4 issues at a time. I'm somewhere in the 20s, so I'm only about a third of or something like a 10th or a 5th of the way through it.
It's so funny you say that because one of my favorite things about Eagle Moss is the models themselves are just gorgeous.
Oh, they are.
A. B. They're making models now in Star Trek where I'm like, there's got to be 11 people that buy this other than me. Like, who is buying a ship that was on screen for a billionth of a second you couldn't even see? So that's the great thing about them. But the thing that cracks me up about them so much is they make this product that is so high-end and precision and well thought out, but then everything but the product is like a mess.
Yeah.
Their magazines have more typos than, like,
it's
I'm like,
insane.
Like, do you not have spell check in England? Like, they repeat the same thing over and over again. And I love what you just said, where it's like, yeah, it's supposed to come monthly, but they're like, fuck it, we'll just send 4 at once. Like, everything about that company is just so wrong and broken, other than the most important thing, which is their product.
The DeLorean build is kind of interesting because it has this whole big community on like Facebook. There's a couple Facebook groups that I'm in of guys that are doing it, and like all constantly they're just like, when am I getting this issue? They've given me the next like 5 issues after it, but I still haven't gotten this one. I've called them, I've emailed them. It's all crazy. But yeah, you're totally right. The model itself is amazing.
I cannot believe I never heard of this. I know there's a Millennium Falcon like this, but that's just too intimidating.
Yeah,
that's the craziest thing I've ever seen, and that's like 1,000 weeks.
Yeah. I've seen that one too, and it's huge. It's the size of it's a 1-to-1 ratio for the model that they used filming Star Wars.
Yeah.
So,
that's I'm not ready for that.
it's a commitment.
Yeah.
So, Brian, before we let you go, is there anything else you want to plug, or do you I don't know if you can tease the release of the final 4 episodes of this initial crop of Toys That Made Us.
The next 4 episodes are, as you know, Transformers and Lego and Hello Kitty and Star Trek. And it's coming out in about 4 months. And, you know, the only thing I just want to plug is, you know, obviously you can't do a phone call like this with 50 people.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to go out of my way to say I was a part of an absolutely phenomenal crew, the best crew I've ever worked with. Everybody was a toy lover. Every editing day was full of toys. I mean, it was the greatest experience of my entire career, and I encourage everybody to watch all the credits because a lot of people made this show, from researchers to story editors to camera operators, and like I said, logistically, you don't want to do an interview like this with 50 people.
Yeah.
So I just want to make it real clear. About 50 people made this show, and the reason people love it is because everybody who worked on the show loved making it. And, you know, I got a call from one of my editors this morning at 8:15 telling me he was in the Bay and asking me to come down and look at something. And that's dedication.
Yeah, man. And it shows.
That's more than dedication. I mean, it's love of what you're doing.
Yeah, it shows in the final product, man. It's a labor of love, and thanks for putting it out in the world.
Thank you for watching it. Thank you for saying what you just said, and thank you for having me on your show and being interested in what we're doing.
Yeah, no problem, man. This has been another Geek Out production. If you enjoyed what you heard, hey, you know, we've got a special episode every Friday. Of course, there's the usual catching up show every Wednesday, and you get book club episodes just about every Tuesday these days. Thanks for listening.